The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, I'd like to welcome our viewers today to a special event. On my right is an old friend, an author, Linda Johnsen, who's brought us in 1994 a very interesting book, somewhat unusual for the West, Daughters of the Goddess, the Women Saints of India. And that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. It's good to see you, Linda.
Good to be here, Justin.
I think back when we were together in that class at Mundelein College,
Right.
way back in the middle 70s, and how our two careers have gone off and keep coming back and crossing. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you get interested in writing this book?
Well, actually, when I was in graduate school, I was asked to assist a pundit who was translating some of the text from the goddess tradition into English. And so I would go over to his house after my classes at night and sit at his feet Indian style. And he would read from these ancient Sanskrit tantric texts. And I'd be putting this stuff into grammatical English. And I'd be sitting there thinking, my gosh, this material is staggering. There is nothing in my experience that has prepared me for the depth and profundity of this kind of goddess spirituality. Now, this was back in the early 1980s, and at that point, no one knew anything about the goddess tradition in this country. In fact, when I told my friends that I decided to write my master's thesis on the goddess, people were saying, "You're kidding. You know, you're going to write about a fertility cult? There's still people on this planet who worship the goddess?" You know, I went to the library to find information about divine images of the feminine images of the divine, and you've probably seen there's something called Books in Print that lists all the books in the English language that are currently in print. You flip to the page that says God, and there's pages and pages and pages of books about God. This was 1983. I turned to the page where I expected an entry for goddess to be, and they didn't even have an entry for the goddess. Now you can see in the last 12 years how much things have changed.
Yes,
There's been an explosion of interest in the goddess.
Well, you know, we in the West here, and you being part of the West, we're more or less used to images of, when we speak of God, of a male image.
Right.
Huh? Do you really feel that the concept of a goddess, which I'd like to have you explain a little bit, is really relevant to Western culture?
In my opinion, it's incredibly relevant. My book is actually about women saints, and I always have to stop and explain what the concept of divinity is in the East, what the goddess is.
Please, go right ahead, Linda.
Because what the idea of what a saint is so radically different in India than it is here.
How is that?
In this culture, we have a male god who created the world out of nothing and guides and protects it from afar. But in India, they have a goddess who projected the universe out of her own divine nature and guides and protects and enlightens it from within itself. So in our culture, when we're talking about a saint, we're talking about someone who loves God and serves humanity. But in India, when we're talking about the women saints, we're talking about people who love God and serve humanity and have found the divine within themselves. It's a very different concept of what they are. It's a very different concept of what nature is. In this country, we feel free to completely exploit nature. But in the tantric conception, nature is the divine mother herself, must be honored, must be worshipped.
This term you keep coming back to, Tantra. I know we in the West have a tendency to always associate it with sexual overtones. And I just wondered if that's really the most radical understanding of that term.
Oh, you know, that's really ironic. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, a reporter called and wanted to interview me for a newspaper article. And he had heard that I was an expert on Tantra. And I told him, well, I've done some graduate research in this area. There's not really that much that I know, but what little know I'll be happy to share. So we started talking, and within a minute it was clear that neither of us was hearing the other. We were talking about completely different things. I was talking about the vast system of practices and scriptures and beliefs that people in South Asia call Tantra. That's explained in great classics like the Tantra Loka or the Tantra Sara. And he was talking about sex. Sometimes I wonder how people in the West came to this concept that Tantra means sex. I think part of the problem was when they first brought the teachings over here, they used the word Tantra instead of Kama. Kama means desire. One of the goddess's names is Kama. Kameshwari, the supreme sovereign empress of desire. But that's only one of her many thousands of names. And in India, the sexual aspect is a very small part of Tantra as a whole. Anyone who goes to India expecting that they're going to learn advanced sexual techniques by going to a tantric master is in for a major shock.
So is Tantra more of a cosmology and a methodology of, what is it, a lifestyle? What would you call it?
Tantra is a method of uncovering the divine within oneself.
Okay. It's a path of spirituality.
Exactly. It's a practical path. That path takes many forms. It can take the form of meditation and yoga, of ritual, of selfless service, of sacred sexuality. It takes many different forms.
And these forms are basically somewhat the individual's preference or their temperament? Is that what determines the path they would choose?
I can tell you know something about it that you're even asking that question. Yes, that's exactly right. The focus for many people who are doing Tantra, though, is devotion to the divine in whatever form they conceive of her.
So the divine in the Eastern concept is one who has a sort of versatility of manifestations. Huh?
There's this wonderful text in India, it's called the Chandi. It's the most important of all the goddess texts in the goddess tradition in India. It's chanted every day by millions of people in India. At the beginning of the text, the goddess projects thousands of goddesses out of herself. And they're all different ways in which goddess energy works in our lives. The goddess's task is to destroy everything in us that's less than divine. The goddesses are warrioresses.
I see.
And the battle is between the aspects in ourselves that are helpful and the aspects in ourselves that are less helpful. But at the end of the text, the goddess reabsorbs all those other goddesses back into herself. There's only one goddess, but there are many different ways to approach her, depending on our own proclivities. We can approach her in the form of Jesus Christ, for example.
Really?
Or in the form of Kuan Yin, in the form of the Buddha.
Okay.
In one of the major goddess texts in India, medieval text called the Tripura Rahasya, the goddess says, what I really am, my reality, is something so vast that it's almost impossible for the human mind to conceive of. So if you have trouble envisioning me as the force from which the entire universe emanated and into which it will be reabsorbed, then imagine me in whatever form appeals to you. And I promise you that in that very form I will come to you.
So it's a recognition of stages of life.
Yes, exactly. And this is also the reason why when you go to India, there is no one who is interested in converting you. That would suggest that your religion will not take you to God. Tantra, they recognize all religions, all paths lead, some maybe a little faster, some maybe a little slower, they all lead you to the divine. The divine works through all these different forms to lead you back to itself.
Well, in your book, since you covered some very interesting women here, some fascinating stories here you've put in here about how they managed to evolve into their own current understanding of life. How would say an ordinary American woman raising kids, how would she contact a goddess? How would that impress on her life, would you say?
I could spend actually an hour answering that.
Please.
But I'm going to try to answer that in a couple of words. Tantra there's so many different ways to find the goddess within oneself, but there's three basic ways. Number one is prayer. That is entering into a living, dynamic, personal relationship with the divine within oneself. Because the goddess is everything, she's within us also. Second way is through meditation. After we send out our call to the divine, then we still our minds and open our heart and listen to her response. The third way is selfless service. Once we feel ourselves having come in contact with the divine within ourselves, then we go out and try to uplift and heal others as our service, as our natural response, in a spirit of humility, not of self-righteousness or, I'm going to go out and save the world, but in a spirit of celebrating the divinity in ourselves.
Okay. Well, you mentioned too the vast number of goddesses. Why are there differences? What constitutes, or what would you describe differentiates the various goddesses?
I was actually raised a Christian fundamentalist.
Okay.
And I was taught that my religion was the highest religion because we have only one God. And religions like Hinduism are the lowest because they have thousands of gods.
Polytheism, as we call
Very
it.
unevolved.
Right.
If you look a little bit deeper at both those traditions, you'll see that Christianity actually has three gods: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Hinduism actually has one God, Parabrahman, or in the goddess tradition, Mahatripura Sundari, the supreme goddess. But there are all different ways to approach her. Say that our fundamental interest in life is making money. We approach the goddess in the form of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, because that's the form that appeals to us, and in that manner she can transform our desire for material wealth into an experience of spiritual wealth. Say, as for you and me, our main interest in life is knowledge. Give me knowledge, or music or the arts.
Right.
We approach the goddess in the form of Saraswati, who's the matron of the arts and who's the goddess of wisdom. That's the form that appeals to people in India when their main interest is art or literature or scriptures, scriptural knowledge. So the goddess assumes all these forms so that anyone, no matter what your mental inclinations are. If you're a warrior, she comes in a horrible form. She comes as Durga, warrior goddess. You can envision her that way, if that will help you to raise the level of your consciousness to something that's very sublime.
Well, sometimes I've seen pictures of this goddess, for example, Kali, and they seem to be rather repulsive, and she looks like a very, very vicious creature, as it were. Are those symbols meant to be taken literally, or are they somehow significant of a deeper meaning?
The goddess you're talking about, she's often symbolized with a garland of human skulls.
Right.
And she's got hack limbs.
I thought it was Halloween when I first saw it.
Right, she's dancing on a corpse. She's one of the most beloved images of the mother in North India.
You better open that one up a little, because it's hard to see how could she be so beloved.
You go into the temples of the goddess Kali and you do not feel fearsome, horrible energy. You feel this loving, uplifting spiritual energy because they understand what she is. Her mission is to destroy everything in you that is less than herself. Everything in you that is less than divine. And if you open yourself up sincerely to the divine, then one of those skulls hanging from her neck is your skull, because you have offered your ego up to her. And you join in her ecstatic dance over the corpse of your egotism.
So the horrifying symbols are all the
It's a potent way of giving illiterate people a way of remembering and understanding who and what the goddess really is.
Okay. Now, some of these women that you've interviewed in here, that you've talked about in here, what were some of your impressions when you first met them? How did they seem? Did they give you an idea that they were really women, or were they abstract, kind of, sometimes think of saints as being rather distant and even maybe a little harsh, very self-disciplined, untouchable. What was your impressions of these saints?
Each woman was very different. Shri Ma is she's a very well-known, beloved saint from North India. She's the incarnation of stillness. She is so serene that when she walks by, it's as if the air itself is not disturbed. Guru Ma is the embodiment of beauty and grace. Ma Yoga Shakti is a spiritual drill sergeant. She's there to drive her students to God. Amachi sleeps 1, sometimes 2 hours a night. You know, the other 23 hours of her day are spent in constant social service. She says that the sorrow in the world is immense and that it is our responsibility to help one another. Each woman is very, very different.
Yes, I see that as you're describing them. Very distinct personalities here, isn't it?
Right, and I'd like to emphasize here because this is one point I don't want people to misunderstand. These women are extraordinary beings. They're women who have found the goddess in themselves. But I'm not saying that we should all rush to India and worship these women. You know, the point of this book is these are women who have found something very special in themselves. And of course, in the tantric tradition, when you find the divine in yourself, if it's an authentic experience, simultaneously you experience the divine in all things. In my opinion, we need models like these. Women who have had mystical experiences that women in our own culture, until only a few hundred years ago, were put to death if they articulated.
You're saying that sort of in Western cultures a kind of repressiveness that's held women back?
That's held everyone back in a sense, because for some good reasons, in our culture we're not allowed to acknowledge our unity with divine being. And anyone in this culture goes around saying, oh, I'm one with God, you know, well, we start thinking of David Koresh, you know. Yes. Alarm bells are going off in our head for very, very good reasons. This is not the case in the tantric tradition. Because, as I just mentioned, when someone truly experiences the divine in themselves, they experience it everywhere, in everyone. Anasuya Devi, who was a great woman sage from Andhra Pradesh, she said, I do not experience that I am something greater than you. God is everywhere. God does not appear in pieces anywhere. You are all God. Therefore, some of these women that I've been with, I think of Sri Ma, I've met hundreds of people in India. I never met anyone more humble than Sri Ma. Ego inflation does not come with genuine spiritual experience. Spiritual humility comes with genuine spiritual experience.
So that would be one of the characteristic or criteria signs a Westerner could use, is the impression that the woman has on me. If she seems to be one of the, who seems to want to draw the limelight, maybe we're not really on the same wavelength as spirituality here.
That may be true.
So basically then you're saying that sanctity, it seems to draw out the most humane characteristics of people.
The divine characteristics of people.
All right, and how would you recognize then the difference, or is there a difference? Is simply the divine characteristics a kind of an abundance of the humaneness, or is there a real difference between humane characteristics and divine characteristics? In your experience.
Right. Woman saint is someone who has found something in herself that exists before her body was born and that will exist after she dies. In fact, they would say in India, someone who has found something in herself that exists before the universe was born and after the universe dies. And none of these women are interested in being worshipped. The fastest way to turn off most women's saints is to go there and want to prostrate and worship them.
Are these single women or are they married, Linda?
Some are single, some are married.
So that the state of social does not necessarily preclude married women.
Oh, absolutely not. These are people who want us to find the divinity in ourselves, to worship the divinity in ourselves and in all things, not only in them. The Vedic tradition goes back literally minimum 8,000 years. India is the one culture on earth where the goddess has been worshipped continually on a massive scale since literally Neo-Paleolithic times. So there's a very profound understanding of what the goddess is and how we can experience the goddess in ourselves. Many, particularly of the earliest and most highly respected women saints, were married. They experienced these divine states while serving their families, while having their own careers, while teaching. The tantric tradition is not about liberation from the world, it's about enlightenment in the world, because the world is sacred, and because our lives as householders or as ascetics, either way, our life is sacred, or can be sacred if we approach it in a sacred manner, respecting the divine in ourselves and in others.
Now, are some of these women even business women? Have you noticed that? Are they engaged in that way? Are they involved in arts or in sciences? Or are they primarily teachers of students and, as you say, indicate householders? Have you found them in the fields of science or business or commerce?
Most of the women that I focused on in my book were women who devoted their lives to spirituality and are spiritual teachers. But as one of my pundit teachers was saying, vast majority of Indian women saints, nobody knows who they are because they're in their villages doing their jobs, they're in the universities teaching. You know, they're women who keep their sanctity to themselves because they're not interested in having a huge following. They just work with a small number of people.
Okay. I see. Okay. Now, how do you feel that this could be, this awareness that perhaps Western women may be looking for, how could that be generated in a country like America?
I think it's starting to be generated. I think it's very interesting that since I first started researching this subject about a dozen years ago, when all that anyone knew about the goddess in India, if they knew anything at all, was from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you know, where the goddess is portrayed as a demoness, and the worshippers of the goddess are all, you know, murderers and lunatics.
Yes.
I have to throw in here parenthetically that some of you may know the biggest movie industry in the world is not in Hollywood, it's in Bombay. And I shudder to think what would happen if the Bombay movie industry started depicting Christians and Jews the way that our movie industry depicts worshippers of the goddess in India. But there's beginning to be a great deal of interest in the goddess in this culture. But it's fresh, it's new, and we're literally recreating a goddess tradition from shards of clay here. But in India, you have an ancient, continuously practiced tradition that in many respects is much deeper and much richer than the resurgence of goddess religion in this country. Here at this point, feminists and women who are interested in the goddess are doing something very valuable. They're celebrating the physical, the feminine, earth, sexuality, sensuality. This is something that this culture needs to do. But when we look to India, we see that all of that is only one small part of what the goddess is about. That tradition is so infinitely much richer and deeper. And I think that women in this culture, and men certainly also, will greatly benefit by learning about the women's, the images of divinity that are feminine in India. And I think we can also benefit from learning from the women saints of India, because we don't know what the priestesses in our own culture were doing in their temples. We know that there was a connection between India and between particularly Greece and some of the southern European cultures. So it's possible, very possible, that when we study with the women saints of India, we may catch a glimpse of what the goddess tradition was like in our own pre-Christian cultures, and what the women saints of our own culture were doing and experiencing thousands of years ago.
Have you ever considered, in your exploring this whole field of the goddesses and the impact it has on the personal development of women, do you feel in, say, the Christian tradition, the devotion to Mary is one of the healthier aspects, perhaps, that have been retained? What's your feeling on that?
Oh, I don't mean to imply for a moment that worship of Jesus is not healthy. But it is very gratifying that even in the West, even with the tremendous repression of goddess spirituality, that you can never stamp the Divine Mother out of people's hearts. And she has survived and flourished in that form, and is continuing to appear in Medjugorje and in people's lives in that form, as she has continued for thousands of years to appear to people in India in as Lakshmi as Saraswati, as Kali as Durga, or as the esoteric goddesses of the yoga lineages.
Okay. So you see, there probably is a connection then, a viable connection between Our Lady of Guadalupe and the various Medjugorje, as you mentioned it, and the whole Indian appreciation of the goddess tradition.
Well, I'm sure that the Pope would not agree with you, but I would. And it's because the goddess herself says in the tantric literature, in whatever form you conceive of me, that form I will come to you.
So if I understand you right, Linda, what you're trying to emphasize here is that the goddess tradition, while it is being maintained and thriving in India, is not indigenous just to that country. Rather, you're talking about something that affects the very nature of femininity, of a woman, so that it's a universal, it's across the board. We're talking about the essence of a woman and what that essence is in relationship to the goddess.
I'd actually like to expand that.
Please.
We're talking not about only what is the essence of being feminine, but the essence of being a conscious creature.
Oh.
Even, God knows, a male.
Okay, open that up more.
In India, they have these wonderful stories in which the goddess incarnates on earth.
Yes.
She incarnates as women, she incarnates as men. Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, is considered, in the Puranic tradition, he's considered an incarnation of the goddess. Oh. So she is what in us is the highest and purest and best. You know, whether we're male, whether we're female, whether we're human, whether we're non-human, whether we're inanimate objects. The goddess says, I am everything that you behold. I am the act of beholding. I am the one in you who beholds. All of this is she, says the Tripura Rahasya.
Okay, okay. That's a very powerful statement you said there, because you're emphasizing then it's not just belonging to one gender, so that I as a male too have this side to me. This is part of my essence. And that perhaps as the men begin to understand that, the feminine principles, as it were, within them, that may have a very healthy and salubrious effect on their lives.
Oh, well, some of the most famous of all the goddess worshippers in India were male. I mean, there was
really?
Brahma Krishna last century.
Right.
There's Ram Prasad in the century before that. The Brahma Rishis, many of them were worshippers of the Divine Mother. They understand what the goddess is. And the soul does not have gender. The goddess herself says that what I am is ultimately beyond gender. And I assume the form of the goddess because that form appeals to you. Do not become attached to that form, because ultimately you will need to realize me in my formless state. But because the world now has become a little bit too focused on the masculine principle, some saints like Amachi, one of the women that I write about.
Yeah, right in the book, yeah.
Yes, she has said it's very important to worship the feminine anthropomorphic image of the goddess right now, to help foster that nurturing, loving, accepting, compassionate, non-exploiting vision of divinity, where we recognize divinity in all things because it is our mother, because we are all her children.
Oh, thank you, Linda. I know we were just getting started at the end here, and I appreciate your coming all the way from California to visit us here in the Twin Cities, and I look forward to us meeting again.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank the listeners. I look forward to sharing this afternoon with you in the future.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.